Welcome back to the What's Your More podcast. I'm your host, Quentin Harris, and we are dialed in for episode 163. You know, I love getting to do episodes like this because today we get to talk about not only the indicators that came out, but some of the stuff that I've been saying and Daniel and I have been talking about on the lending update. It's starting to come out now, and it's starting to show, and the cracks in the labor market are starting to happen, which is a win for us because now we're starting to see rate relief. And I'm going to lead this podcast by saying this, and I'll probably say it a few more times. It doesn't take the Federal Reserve reducing rates for the mortgage rate market to get better, for the real estate market to continue to improve, and we're starting to see that rate relief. From the last podcast you've heard till now, we've already seen the 10-year Treasury come down, I would call it substantially compared to where it was. We've gone from 4.73 down to a 4.3, and we're seeing that relief in the rate. We're also starting to see many things that we've talked about should happen are starting to happen. The compression in the market is starting to relieve a little bit. The actual discrepancy between what should be the 10-year yield plus the normal 1.6 to get your 30-year fixed rate is starting to get better now. It's gone from 3.25. We're down to about 260 now, so we're starting to see relief there. And again, without a Federal Reserve rate reduction, we're still going to see relief, and it's continuing to show that that holds true. Now, we're only 4 weeks away from the Federal Open Market Committee, and if for some reason we do see a rate cut, well, that's a whole different story. We could see a cliff in rates there, and that could be something we've all been anticipating, which would essentially cause that lock-in effect buyer to come to the market. That move-up buyer might start coming back to the market if we start to see that. Interestingly, I'm going to hear Raphael Bostic speak today. I'm going to go get a chance to meet with him in a fireside chat. For those who don't know who that is, that's the head of the Federal Reserve out of Atlanta. So we're going to sit down with him today, and we're going to ask some tough questions. Might even get a chance to get him on the show. So this is something we're going to work towards, but no matter what, I will report back with some commentary from that as Daniel and I get a chance, my co-host, get a chance to go sit down in a fireside chat with him today later on this afternoon. Very excited about that. So let's talk about it. So we had two major indexes come out on Tuesday. Today is Thursday, the 16th. We had two major indexes come out on the 14th and the 15th. So the first one was the PPI, right? We talk about that one, the producer price index. That's kind of the not real market mover, doesn't really get a lot of respect, but for whatever reason, portions of that do kind of give us a sneak peek of what the Fed's favorite form of inflation is the PCE, which will come out in 2 weeks. But then yesterday, we had the consumer price index come out, and that's the market mover. For whatever reason, that seems to be the one that moves the equity market and the bond markets instantaneously, right? It doesn't take a long period to digest that to find out where the market's going to go on that. And in this particular case, I talked about this last podcast. I said I thought there would be a chance that it comes in below the headline and that the core is either going to come right at what it's supposed to be at or right below. And that's exactly what happened. And for once, we finally get to say, yes, we got it right on this one because we're very excited because we've been calling for this. We've been forecasting for this to happen, and it finally happened here. And so we had a headline reading come in on an annual basis. It's actually down from 3.5 to 3.36. And then we had a core come down from an annual of 3.8 to 3.6. This is a win. This is a big win. And if you're in the mortgage business, you're seeing it happen right in front of you. From a consumer side, for all of our listeners and consumers, this should be giving you some lower rates, anywhere from an eighth to a quarter versus what you were looking at a week ago, maybe even a couple of days ago. This is an instantaneous win because we're seeing it reflective in the rates instantly. And so it could have been lower. That's going to be the theme of this podcast today. It could have been lower. And I talk about this because if you remember, I sat in on the Strategic Investment Conference, and one of the things that David Rosenberg, and I had the slides, I think it was 3 episodes, I was able to use his slide deck and put it in there. Guys, everything on the core is down, meaning it's almost at zero or below inflation. 0%. I mean, we're talking 0.27. We know that the Fed's favorite form of inflation is PCE, and they're trying to get that to 2, and it's currently at 2.9, right? So it's got a 2 handle. But the CPI, everything was low on these indicators. Everything except a few things. So I want to point out what those few things were. Now, we continue to talk about one of the major differences when you talk about inflation, right? We're all inflation experts at this point. One of the major differences between the CPI and the PCE. Now, again, PCE is the personal consumption expenditure. That's what the Federal Reserve measures. When they look at things and they say we want a target rate of 2% on inflation, that is what they're looking at. Currently, it's 2.9 on the core. I'm going to continue to echo that. We already got the 2 handle. We're there. The CPI, that's a different index that affects and impacts the consumers directly. And there's always some disparity between the two. They're never in a line. They're never the exact same. And traditionally speaking, the CPI is always higher. And that holds true right now. But the major difference is that the CPI has a much higher weighted average of one particular sector, and that's housing. We call that shelter. it's not as big over here on the PCE. And let's face it, we all know home prices are up. We talk about this all the time. And I'm going to have this slide on here. Again, hats off to Barry and the team over at MBS Highway. He and his son Dan knocked this out of the park. I'm going to put this slide on our YouTube channel at What's Your One More with the number one at What's Your One More. If you're not subscribing to this, please hit the subscribe button. Charlie's doing a great job over here. We're throwing all of our links in there. We're throwing all of our data sources in there. Often on times, you guys ask us, hey, where are you getting this data from? And I used to have to go actually cut and paste the website that we're getting it from. And, some of the sources we pay to be a part of, or we're in a network of sources. But now we just drop it in the YouTube channel for you. So if you're wanting to know, it's all there in the channel. And I know you're seeing the reels online and you're commenting on that, but if you just literally go to the channel, everything is there. And again, appreciate all the feedback, but want to continue to give you guys the data and the input that we're getting as well. But back to this slide that Barry and his team put together. When you look at shelter, the weighted average is almost 50% of the CPI. The shelter is almost 50% of the CPI. That's huge. It's 45.4 to be exact. But for purposes of this conversation, it's damn near 50. So housing, we know, is rising in cost. And the other measurement in there is rents. Now, we've talked about this quite some time, that there is a lagging indicator in rents, right? Rents are lagging. The way that the Federal Reserve looks at that is it's lagging. They don't really get real-time rents in there. Now, we do have metrics that show us that, but this is lagging data in this index, right? But then there's another factor of the owner equivalent of rent. All of this goes into shelter. You got owner's equivalent of rent, you've got rent, and then you've got lodging away from home. We've discussed all these many a times, but for those that are first-time listeners here, I'll break it down. Rent is rent. Owner's equivalent of rent is a very old way, but it's been consistently old for quite some time. They survey a group of people, and they call them. Hey, Quentin, how much will you rent your home for? I don't know. I wouldn't rent it for any less than this. Great. Thank you. That's owner's equivalent of rent because I own the house and what I would be the equivalent of what a rent payment I would pay on that. Very outdated way, but nonetheless, it's the case. And then there's lodging away from home. This is vacations, Airbnbs, anything that you're not at home for, right? That all comprises of shelter. Guys, that metric, I mean, if you look at the core reading, it made up of the 3.62, it made up 2.51% annualized. So it's the vast majority of that reading. And then the second largest one was motor vehicle insurance. And when I say largest, I mean highest ranked indicator as far as coming in higher inflation. And I think we all know this. If you own a car, you've seen your auto insurance go up. If you own a house, you've seen housing insurance go up, even though that's not part of motor vehicles. Insurance cost is rising. There's many different reasons why it's rising, but it's rising. And that's a whole nother podcast as to what we think and why that's happening. But it doesn't appear to be getting better. And if you annualize the year-over-year impact of motor vehicle insurance, it's up 22%, 22.6% to be exact. So if you take motor vehicle insurance and you take the shelter cost and you said, okay, how much of that annually, on the month-over-month effect, how much of that actually makes up this core reading in the form of the 3.62? It makes up all of it except almost a quarter. So literally everything else is below in the ranking of CPI as far as inflation. Everything else is showing signs of inflation have slowed down except motor vehicle insurance and housing on the CPI. To me, that's encouraging because we continue to talk about eventually the rent lag indicator is going to catch up. Eventually, you're going to get motor vehicle insurance flatten. And as that happens, you're going to see that CPI come down. Yeah, sure, it might rear its head every now and then because maybe an oil price, spikes or something of that nature happens, but we're seeing that it's under controlled and it's maintained. I'm not saying that this is the end all be all, but this is a great sign for us. So let's go back to the PPI for just a second. If you're looking at that from Tuesday's reading and you're prepared to kind of tell me, hey, listen, that came in higher than expected. It did, but there was a massive revision from the month before. And the actual difference between what it should have come in and what it did come in at is the exact difference of the revision. It only took the markets about 20 minutes to digest that and realize, oh, wait a minute, this isn't wrong. This isn't far off. This is a revision that happened from the previous month. And what's interesting about that is had that revision been in and accurately accounted for the month earlier, we probably would have saw rate relief in April. Now we're getting it in May, but we should have had it in April as well because, again, that would have trickled down into a lower PCE reading. Instead of saying at 2.9, that might have come in at 2.8 or 2.7, and that could have changed the markets, but maybe even give a different commentary from the Federal Reserve, meaning maybe a rate cut should have been in place coming into this next meeting a little bit more than what people think it's going to be. I, for one, still think it's there. But again, going back to this, what's interesting to me is that all signs of the PPI and what goes into what, there's only a little bit that trickles into that PC. Those factors that trickle into it were all downward readings, which means that's a good thing. And I think there's more continued signs that show that the market is doing exactly what the Federal Reserve is saying they need to see in order to start the cutting of rates. Now, they've already said, listen, we're going to start trimming down the quantitative tightening. That's a win. So that's a check. The market's reacted well. Now they're saying, listen, if we can get to a 2% target rate inflation, that's another sign we want to see, but we don't want to see a softening of the labor market. That's the last thing I want to touch on here, is that we're seeing signs of the labor market. I don't need an index to tell me the labor market is starting to show signs of weakness. By the way, it's Thursday the 16th. We talk about, hey, watch the initial job loss claims come in. Watch them because they will tell you what's happening. Another higher reading than expected. It's nothing to write home about, but it's a higher reading than expected. But if you just look at the headlines, right? I think we just saw Red Lobster, as of yesterday or the day before, is filing a restructuring bankruptcy. They're shutting down branches and locations, and those will be additional people that are going to be laid off. You just had Express do that. You've had Google lay off people. I mean, I can keep going. There are the signs are already weakening there. We don't need to see it in a job index report that's going to tell me that, hey, listen, more government jobs are created or more people are taking part-time jobs, mainly in the form of a second job. We know that already. You guys know that. Some of the comments that you guys have put on there, I believe there was one user, and I wish I had the name, that talked about how they lost their job and now they're working 2 jobs just to live. That when you start getting real-time feedback like that, we know what's going on. And again, with the unemployment rate coming in at 3.9, that's another sign of softening of the market. And if that thing stays at 3.9 or even goes up a little bit, that's what the Federal Reserve doesn't want to see, because their policy is to not make sure that we do not have a recession. A soft landing is what they want. And some are going to argue that it's imminent. Like, we could do it right now and we could actually see it and we might even be there. But the question remains, if the Federal Reserve continues to stay in that tightening range, if they're still in, even though they've started to untighten a little bit, that it's not fully, it's not a loosening policy by any means, but if they stay where they are in a semi-restrictive territory, could it do more long-term than harm than help? And that's what we're going to continue to watch here. One of the questions, we're going to ask some tough questions today. A lot of questions are going to be asked today, and I'm going to be intently taking notes and watching to hear what the Atlanta Fed chairman has to say today, because maybe we'll get some tea leaves, maybe we won't. And remember, we talk about this all the time. I wonder if today is going to be one of those media reporting days where one of the Federal Reserve comes out and says something that kind of alters or changes the market based on what they said or, a statement they make. And we'll be looking for that today. But nonetheless, I would say all signs are continuing to point towards the Federal Reserve's initiative is being met in the form of a 2% target rate inflation on the core PCE. Remember, we have 2 handle on it, and softening of the employment market is what they want to prevent. And that is already starting to happen. So some will argue it has to get a lot worse. I would argue that the data that's coming in is not as reflective as how bad it is, but we'll see. Time will tell. But the good news is that was a win we got yesterday. Enjoy it, because in the markets, we're seeing the benefits finally. In the equity markets, they're seeing, the Dow's getting ready to break 40,000 for the first time. There's a lot of wins when that happens there. And so, it's a good sign. So look forward to watching this more, and look forward to reporting back on it. And thank you guys for tuning in. If you like what you're hearing, please share this podcast. Give us a 5-star review, especially on Apple or Spotify. We'd greatly appreciate it. If we're not in your downloads, click that checkbox at the top, put us in your downloads. And ultimately, if you're not a audio person, but you're a visual person, check out our YouTube channel at What's Your One More. Again, we put all of our stats, we put all of our links, and all the videos on there for you to check out. So if you guys would do that, till the next time, we'll see you at the next episode of What's Your One More.
I got one more shot, I'm gonna make it. One more chance, I'm gonna take it. I meant it when I said it, now it's time for me to do it. I got one life to live, so I put my all into it, yeah.